No one wants to be the person with the stick. Working in animal control, just showing up with the pole makes you the enemy of the very animals you're there to help. When a wild animal becomes a danger to itself or to a community, someone has to do the job. There's the responder who tracks the animal, the one who tries to calm it down, and then there's me. I'm the one with the stick. And I hate using it. You know the one, don't you? The pole with the noose-like collar hanging from one end. Did you know that they come in different sizes? There are small ones for kittens and puppies, larger ones for raccoons and opossum, larger ones yet for dogs and deer. If the animal's got a neck, we've got a noose that will fit it. Pretty morbid, huh? You can see why I didn't like my job at the time. As far as the animals were concerned, I was the hangman. I never hurt them, of course. I never lost any wildlife on the job. That was never enough to change how I felt. On the day that this story takes place, we were responding to a call about feral cats. Feral was the word the caller used to describe them. That wasn't our word. All we knew was that an abandoned house in a poor neighborhood had been overrun by strays. The cats were starting to terrorize the neighborhood, looting garbage bins and cornering small pets and children. Something had to be done. We knew right away that the job wasn't going to be easy. The cats weren't going to come calmly with their paws up. They were going to need the noose. That day may have been the first time I was actually thankful to be the person holding the other end of that instrument. We took a look at the house before going in. The foundation was weak, crumbling and cracking even on the outside of the home. The porch roof was slanted and sagging. We'd walked through worse. After reviewing our safety precautions, we thought nothing of it. We weren't going to let an old building stop us from doing our jobs. Caroline went in first, speaking in the soft voice that I'd seen tame a dozen stray dogs. Max was behind her with a metal cage under his arm. That left me in the back, pole slung over my shoulder and sorry written on my face. I didn't want to take all those cats back to the shelter. I knew the majority of them would be euthanized. If we'd arrived sooner, maybe that would have been the case. As it stood, the time it took us to respond to the call was too great. A different fate had already befallen the cats. There were immediate signs of a fight. Tufts of fur and small spatters of blood. Caroline spotted a claw laying on the floor, torn from its place on a cat's paw. It didn't seem like the cats had been killed. There had been a fight, and they'd abandoned the house. It made sense. Then something moved in the building. The sound of wood dragging across floorboards. A heavy thud. We asked if anyone else was inside. No answer. Max stayed in the first area to search for any cats that had stayed behind. Caroline and I went to investigate the sound. We found the entrance to the basement. The door was left ajar. Wide scratch marks lined the tile leading to the staircase. Caroline reminded me to have the pole ready. I didn't think to remind her that I was carrying the stick sized for cats. I followed her into the basement. We never had a hope of capturing the thing that made those scratches. The basement reeked of dust and urine. It was pungent enough to make me gag even before I reached the bottom stair. Caroline was made of tougher stuff than me. Her eyes were alert, looking for whatever animal we'd accidentally come to rescue. When I saw those eyes go wide, I knew we'd stumbled into something dangerous. She turned suddenly and ran by me, taking the stairs 2 at a time just to put some distance between herself and the basement. I wasn't smart enough to follow. Instead, I looked. And I saw the creature that had scratched the floor. I saw the creature that had chased the cats from their den. It was the size of a shepherd. The next time someone entered that basement, the creature was gone. Caroline still calls me sometimes, asking if what we saw was real. I don't need that same reassurance. I don't need you to explain what this thing was because I know it was there. That's all that matters to me. I still have the stick I carried that day. The end of it is still stained with the creature's blood. This happened on vacation. I've heard that we aren't the only ones this has happened to, and that it's happened around other lakes in the area. No one is really sure what is going on. We decided to vacation in British Columbia for a couple of weeks in the summer. I had always wanted to go. I had spent some time in the east of Canada and wanted to see what the western half was like. At first, we had thought about going to Vancouver, but my son found some information on some of the great parks and sites, and we decided to go to Skaha Lake instead. We'd stay at one of the lodges, rent boats or canoes, do a little swimming, and just hang out at the beach. If the beach got boring, then we'd explore the other parks and areas around the lake. It was my partner who decided we should just rent a large RV once we got to Canada and just fly into Vancouver. That way we could explore some of Vancouver and then just drive to Skaha Lake. We'd combine a road trip with a nice vacation. I liked the idea, so we decided on that as our plan and left the following weekend. I found out that the lake was around 4 or 5 hours from Vancouver. So we decided to just stay in Vancouver for a night, explore the town, stay at a hotel, and then in the morning drive on to the lake. Renting an RV was no issue. It worked out pretty easily. We explored Vancouver, ate at a few restaurants, and then stayed the night. In the morning, we piled into the RV, found a grocery store, and then packed up for the lake. There are a few different areas to stay at around the lake. I got a spot that was right on the water. We parked the RV and explored how we could rent canoes or a boat for the day. We ended up going to Skaha Lake Park. They had a great beach, and you could rent canoes there. We spent the first day swimming and hanging out at the beach, since part of our day was already gone. It was the next day that we went back to the park and rented canoes so that we could explore. It was fun. The kids had never canoed before, and neither had my partner. The kids kept forgetting how to turn the canoe, but eventually they got the hang of it after a couple of hours. We traveled around the swimming area, then headed out towards an area where you can see the Skaha Bluffs from the water. We paddled for a while, and we were about half a mile from shore, all the way across from where we had started. That's when my daughter said he paddle hit something. I thought that was odd, because we were far enough out that there shouldn't have been any rocks. But I told her and her brother to turn the canoe away from that spot and just keep going the other direction. That's when my partner called out from the front of the canoe. At first, it looked like the waves were just picking up a little. But as I watched, it wasn't just waves. There was something moving in the water. I could see a slight wake, and some dark came up just a little bit. I paddled the canoe slowly and kept watching, trying to get a better look at what was in the water. At first, I thought it might be an otter or two. They are known to swim in these waters, and that they are apparently quite common. But once we got closer, it seemed way too big to be an otter. Something dark came up, the back of something, and I could swear it was moving the same way a snake moves in the water. At that point, I forgot about paddling and just focused on what was in the water. The wake and the area that came up, it seemed to be as big or bigger than the canoe we were in. It was hard to judge, though, and I don't really have any experience judging things in the water. To me, though, it seemed at least as big as our canoe. We sat watching it for about a half hour. Nothing more ever surfaced, but just a tiny bit of what it was. Afterwards, it seemed to dive, and we lost track of it. My partner and daughter wanted to leave the water, so we turned around and headed back to where we got the canoes. I kept a watch out, and so did my son. When we got back to shore, he wanted to go back out again, but my partner said no. We found some rangers at the park and told them what we saw. They said they'd make a report, and that we weren't the only ones to see things in the water, but that most of the sightings in the area were farther north. There was a much larger lake up there, and they had been getting reports of similar sightings for years. It was only recently that people began to see things in the water of Skaha Lake. They weren't sure if it was because people were hearing about the sightings farther north, or if they were actually seeing things in the water. They asked if we were sure it wasn't a group of otters swimming in the water. Otters will apparently sometimes swim in a row, and people can mistake them for a larger animal. I said no, it was definitely not otters, and that the wake being made by whatever it was bigger than the wake made by our canoes. I'm not sure if they believed us, but it did look like they were writing down notes, or what we had just told them. We stayed out of the water the rest of the day, and the next day as well. We decided to go hiking. We tried to get the kids to go swimming after that, telling them that nothing swam in the buoyed-off swim zone. You couldn't even find fish there. The animals knew that's where people went swimming. They never went back in, though. We ended up cutting our stay short and headed back to Vancouver. In the end, we ended the vacation in Vancouver, staying there the rest of the vacation. I felt bad. The kids were really looking forward to staying on the beach for most of the vacation. I don't know what we saw in the water. I don't really know what kind of fish or wildlife really lives there. My uncle had been begging me to come and visit him in Washington for years. He wanted to take me hunting. My dad is a computer engineer. He's not exactly the outdoor type. I kept putting it off and putting it off. I'm a city person. I'm used to walking to the cafe and getting my coffee, waving to the people out walking their dogs or heading to the train. I don't even own a pair of boots. But then my mom guilt tripped me. She called me every day for a week until I cracked. She told me how my cousin, my uncle's son, hadn't come to visit him once since moving away. So I said fine. I'll come visit and we go hunting and shoot some poor deer or whatever they hunt up there in the Washington boonies. I landed at the airport and got an Uber up to my uncle's. I thought it was a joke. I had no idea he lived like the frontier people in a little run-down wooden cabin right smack in the middle of the woods. He came out onto the porch sipping a coffee. He was dressed like all the hunters I saw on TV. He had a thick hunter's cap on his head and snow pants and a neon orange jacket. He smiled and yelled, "Ready for your first hunt?" He dressed me in clothes like his and pushed me out the front door and toward his big truck. I left like the Michelin Man, wobbling through the crunchy leaves and dirt. We climbed in and he peeled out, kicking up all sorts of dust. He pointed out spots where he'd shot this or that buck or a bear and all this other stuff he probably had on his walls inside his little cabin. I was afraid to go back inside when we got back. Not really. After a while, with no warning, my uncle took a hard right turn in his truck and through a small gap in the trees. The road was so slim that branches were smacking the car and breaking off behind us. We drove on for a while. It got darker and darker as the forest got thicker. When I was about to ask him where the hell we were going, the trees opened to a clearing. He parked the truck and hopped out. I got out and followed him to the back of the truck. I wished I had stayed home and watched TV. I wasn't looking when he tossed a cold beer at me. It bounced off my stomach and plopped on the ground. He cracked his beer and drank. "Always helps to have a cold one," he said. I picked up my beer and drank too. It softened the sting of being out here in the middle of nowhere, freezing even with all the hunting clothes on. He gave me a quick and very confusing rifle tutorial, and before I knew it, I was following him toward a large ledge overlooking a valley or canyon or something. I was watching the rifle bounce on his back and wasn't paying attention because I bumped into him. His foot slid a little on the loose rocks toward the edge of the drop. "We're going down there," he said. I followed him to what I guess was a path. I wouldn't have seen it if it weren't for my uncle, let's put it that way. It was steep and I walked slow. I didn't realize until then I might have a fear of heights. My uncle led us down gradually, switch back after switch back. I zoned out and just marched like a good solider when suddenly my uncle stopped and put his hand on my chest. It was really jarring and woke my brain up from whatever walking fog I was in. "Look," he said, and pointed a little down and to our left. I couldn't see anything. We stayed there for another full minute, but it felt like 10, standing completely still and silent. He moved his rifle from his shoulder into his hands in front of him. That's the best way I can describe it. I'm not a gun guy. He motioned us forward. I was nervous now, seeing how quiet and serious my uncle was being, and seeing his finger hover near the trigger of his rifle wasn't helping. I heard a loud snap from somewhere behind the tree line. My uncle stopped and looked that way. He started walking really slow in that direction. After maybe 20 paces, something caught my eye. I still can't say if any of this happened or if my uncle had spiked my coffee or something. A few steps off the trail, I saw a giant, and I meant giant footprint. It was like a person's, but huge. Way too big to be a human. My uncle looked from the print to me, and then he undid the safety on his rifle. I felt sweat on my forehead and under my armpits, but it could have been from the thick layers of dumb hunting gear I was wearing. Without even thinking, I moved the rifle from my back into my hands. I undid the safety. I felt the trigger with my finger. The first time ever. My uncle put up a finger. I was so scared it seemed funny, like something from a war movie. I stopped. My uncle pointed into a cluster of trees. I strained my eyes. And then I saw them. Staring back at me were two large black eyes, and where the light caught were beads of red. It was staring straight at me. The eyes hovered what must have been at least 10 feet above the ground. My uncle lined up his rifle at those glowing eyes. And in a sudden burst, whatever it was, the giant beast lunged to its right. In a complete panic, I pulled the trigger on my gun. The shot was deafening. My uncle shoved me to the ground and came down beside me. We could hear whatever it was crashing away through the forest. A little later, as we walked in silence back to the truck, I could see my knuckles turning white from squeezing the gun as tight as I could. My uncle didn't say a word until we got back to the cabin. He said, "Thanks for visiting. Don't tell your mom.